Kampala here in Uganda, and I work as Musawah's Sub Saharan Africa Program Officer. I'll be co-moderating today's event alongside my colleague Noura Abdi, who is the Gender Officer at the Somali Women's Development Center. We are really honored you could join us for this event, and we hope that wherever you're joining us from, you and your families are safe and healthy. Thank you so much. Before we get started, I wanted us to get into a few housekeeping announcements that I would like to put across for this webinar. Just a second. Okay, so the event is scheduled to be 1.5 hours. It is a live streamed event on our Musawah Facebook page. A recording of it will be posted on our YouTube channel, and it would also be available on our Facebook page after the event. This session will be in English, and we have Arabic interpretation available. So just click at the bottom of the globe, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and it says interpretation. When you click on it, it says interpretation, and you can switch to Arabic audio channel. Our colleagues Sula Fandina are really doing a good job on the back end, and we are happy that they could join us. We have participants, and as a must or as a rule, we will be muting all participants on the Zoom. And if you're joining us, make sure that if you have any feedback, questions, ask them via the Q&A function and the comment sections below the live stream video on Facebook. Throughout the event, we have our colleagues at Musawah on the back end who are helping us, and they will be supporting with resources on the chat they will share. And then we have the live stream section and the comment section under the live stream video will be also having some of these resources posted there. So if you have any of your colleagues you want to share the event with, please feel free to go to the Facebook page or the link of the Zoom. You can share that with them. So a quick introduction before we get into the conversation for the day. I would like to begin by sharing about our campaign for justice in Muslim family laws. The campaign was launched in May 2020 at the beginning months of the global pandemic. It's a campaign that is for and led by Muslim women, and they're demanding for reform of discriminatory family laws and practices that have for decades been justified in the name of Islam. And this historic sisterhood of Muslim women from all over the world have inspired us to do this work because they've been fighting and advocating for justice and equality that has led us to think that maybe beyond just thinking about supporting them in their endeavors, we can think about a platform that galvanizes these efforts. And this led us to identify a need and power for a global campaign that is now the campaign for justice in Muslim family laws. And we do this standing in our faith as Muslim women from all over the world. So the campaign is bringing together advocates for family law reform from across 3 regions. We have advocates from the MENA region, Sub Saharan Africa, and the South and the Southeast Asia. And the idea behind it is that we want to build the capacity of the advocates to justify the possibility of reform in Muslim contexts. We want to share successful strategies and also build their collective strengths to stand in their ground in the face of resistance and attacks, and build public support for the idea that change is necessary and it is possible to bridge the disconnect between law and reality. So this month, we've been celebrating the 2nd anniversary of the campaign, being May. And during this period, we've been reflecting on our journey. Just last year in 2021, we launched more targeted programming in in Sub-Saharan Africa region, particularly the Greater Horn of Africa. So we started by implementing some of the campaign for justice activities in the region. And before I actually get into the work we've done there, I want to speak about the region. So the Sub Saharan Africa region is very interesting. It features Muslim majority, Muslim minority contexts. Some of them have codified and some of them don't have, some of them have non-codified laws. We have these laws existing alongside customary and statutory structures and legal frameworks. So there's definitely a multitude of legal and socio-economic factors that influence how family laws are formulated. And of course, there are also some of these laws are progressive laws. And so there's a lot for us to learn from that. And so because we were launching our work in the region, we embarked on what we call a mapping exercise of Muslim family laws. And our focus was the Greater Horn of Africa. And we looked at the countries of Somalia, Somaliland, Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and South Sudan. And we were mapping these family laws alongside 12 principal issues of concern that Musawah has identified and categorized in 3 sections. That's before, during, and at the dissolution of a marriage. So someone who might be wondering, why the Greater Horn of Africa, right? Musawah is part of a consortium of 5 organizations that are implementing a project called the We Cannot Wait project. And the idea behind the project is to build a strong, autonomous and inclusive women's economic, social and political movement in 6 countries that I mentioned earlier. And so for the work we were doing around mapping, we collected data and in a format we call the country tables, and these resources are being shared in our chat. And so from this data, we've observed, actually, even before the data, because the data was really just to confirm what we already knew, we observed that discriminatory family and personal status laws persist, and they are often justified with reference to religion, identity, and culture. We're using, we wanted to use the Standing for Justice digital series, particularly this episode, to spotlight some of the experiences from the researchers and activists who were part of this exercise of mapping this work. And we are hosting some of them today from the countries of Somalia, Somaliland, South Sudan, and Uganda. But before we get into the discussion about that, maybe to talk a bit about the Standing for Justice series. This is a multi-platform series which has been co-created by Musawah, national level advocates and activists, and of course the team at Musawah. And it's our way of taking back the digital space as a space to gather, to protest and amplify the calls for an end to discriminatory family law practices within these countries. And we are here on the Zoom platform, but of course the conversation is also happening on our Facebook. And post this event, we'll be doing some other activities to follow up and amplify the conversation that we will have today. We strongly encourage you to actually join us in live tweeting, sharing quotes, what stands out, feedback, and your perspective. And definitely, of course, the call to action that we'll hear from our activists and the researchers we are hosting today. We will be using, just the next slide, please. So we will be using a very unique format today. The format called Anger, Hope, and Action. It's a conversational tool that was conceptualized originally by Saul Alinsky and used in labor movements to invite people to understand the issues of injustice and pain, take stock of what was hopeful and any opportunities in their context and movement, and of course, spur people and communities towards action. So we will follow the same format. We want you to understand what the injustices are in this context. What are the issues that stand out? We want you to actually learn about the different strategies, hopeful strategies, because we need hope always. And then the opportunities that are present. And then after that, we are calling you to act, to go back and do something about what you hear today. So we are dividing the event into those three segments: anger, hope, and action. And so before we begin that discussion, allow me introduce my wonderful co-moderator, Noura Abdi, who will introduce the rest of the speakers. Noura, as I mentioned earlier, works at the Somali Women's Development Center as a gender officer, a human rights CSO that promotes rule of law and access to justice for marginalized groups. She optimizes projects to center women and children by working alongside vulnerable communities to increase their access to education, medical, and legal assistance. And in addition, she provides technical support to the organization to ensure that gender equity principles are incorporated in all policies and activities. Welcome, Noura.
Thank you so much, Rahema. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Rahema said, I'll be introducing our other speakers today. We have speakers from 3 countries: Uganda, South Sudan, and Somaliland. Starting off in Uganda, we have Asha Mwanga joining us. Asha is a renowned human rights activist and a writer and a lawyer. She is a 2017 Global Award-winning young woman alongside 20 other young women, having been selected by the Coady International Institution of St. Francis Xavier University of Canada. She is the current Global Director of Family Law Reform at the Alliance for Inclusive Muslims. In addition, she is the founding Executive Director of the Islamic Women's Initiative for Justice, Law, and Peace, and a Global Advisor and of Sub Saharan Regional Facilitator with the Young Feminist Fund. She's also an advocate of the High Court of Uganda and subordinate courts. Asha has a master's trainer of sexual and gender-based violence with the Regional Training Facility of the International Conference of Great Lakes Region. She's a PhD Human Rights Fellow and holds 2 bachelor's degrees, a Bachelor's in Development Studies and a Bachelor's of Law, as well as a Master's of Arts degree in Human Rights. Joining us from South Sudan is Zabib Musa Loro. Zabib is an administrator, advocate for gender and Muslim women's rights, mentor, founder, and executive director of Islamic Development and Relief Agency. She's also the chairperson of the Network of AIDS Services Organization in South Sudan. Zabib is known for being a member of the South Sudan NGO Forum, a representative of NGOs in the Human Rights Coordination Team. She has experience in peace building, gender, sexual rights and human rights, humanitarian and development programs, including policy advocacy, mentorship, establishing and staffing organizations, managing development and operating environments with experience in fragile, post-conflict, and resource-poor settings, providing strategic guidance and overseeing project implementation and community engagement. Zabib holds a master's degree in human rights and governance, a bachelor's in human rights management from Makerere University, and a diploma in community-focused development studies and a diploma in community-focused development. Lastly, from Somaliland, we have Hasan Sudhi. Hasan Sudhi is a legal researcher and a legal drafting lecturer at the University of Hargeisa. He also serves as an advisory group leader at the Institute for Strategic Insight and Research, ISIR, a leading think tank based in Hargeisa with a focus on the Horn of Africa. His work focuses on governance, civil liberty, transformative democratization, and radicalization. In the past, Sudhi has served in United Nations programs as a governance specialist. Finally, I'd like to give you a little information about our moderator here, Rahema. As Rahema said, she is part of the Musawah team, the Sub Saharan African program. But also, she's an award-winning youth nonprofit leader and a passionate women's rights activist. She has 10 years of experience leading and supporting local, national, regional, and international policies, advocacy, influencing communications, movement building, and advocacy evaluation efforts. Rehema previously worked under various capacities for leading NGOs, private sector entities, and youth organizations, including Reignite Africa, a social enterprise she founded in 2015. So that is who will be moderating for us today. Rehema, I'd like to throw it back to you. We can begin our talk for the day.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction to the lineup of speakers and my own introduction. Thank you so much, Noura, for that. I wanted us to pivot now into the interesting part, I'm assuming, of the discussion that has us all here today. And the first segment, as I mentioned earlier, will be focused on the anger segment. We want to understand the different contexts where the different panelists today based, or at least they're representing within their submissions. And so we want to learn about what the context is like, what are the challenges, what are the injustices we have to think about and reflect upon, and what inspires them to do the work they do. And so I'll start by, I guess, posing a question to Zabib and Hassan. Zabib and Hassan, South Sudan, Somalia, and Somaliland have one very outstanding thing in common, that these countries have no family law. And so there's a lack of understanding about what constitutes a family law and what doesn't. What is the implication of this, and how does it impact the lives of women? What are the main family law issues impacting women and girls in these countries? We could start with you, Zabib. Zabib, are you there? Maybe in the meantime, let's have Hassan share for now as we wait for Zabib to set up her end.
So thank you so much, Rahima. Thank you to everyone who actually organized this great opportunity to present this critical and importantly and significant topic. So then, so the question is as to whether Somalia, including Somaliland, has a family law or not. Itself actually is a question. But I mean, going to the issue itself, and that is not a surprise.
Good morning, Rahma, and everybody. Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good.
Hassan.
So Somalia, of course, is in general is a post-conflict situation, and is now recovering from a prolonged conflict that affected the politics, the judiciary, and all the things, and is now recovering from that. So you can imagine a country with millions of people that has not been governed by a given specified or codified legislation for about 2 decades before 2012. And of course, if any, those old set of legislation is essentially outdated. One is before 1991 were there, and of course widely applied. So coming to the question of family law, and for the family law, it is complexities. It started even before the 1991, and for ideological, political, and social reasons, the question of having family law and what constitutes family law has been a hotspot from 1970s. And when the army at the time forcefully imposed the first ever family law, I mean written family law or statutory family law, but was openly resisted by the people led by the ulama or the religious scholars. So since that, the family law topic has been actually hotspot, like hot potato. However, the country has been at the same time having functioning, but of course unwritten family law, and informed by three sources of law. So then the Sharia, Islamic Sharia, particularly the Shafi'i school, has been serving as a source of substantive rulings for the family law. And while the customary practices were also providing the procedural rules and the rules to apply during the course of that process and customarily. And while the statutory legislation is particularly in the urban areas had been actually and serving as a source of administrative authority to register,
I don't know who has just joined the call. Can you please mute yourself? On Hassan.
Yeah, okay. And so then the statutory rules had been providing, particularly in the urban areas, had been providing and serving as a source of administrative authority to register, to adjudicate, particularly disputed family cases. So what constitutes family law? In general and in short, this complementary efforts, which are of course specified, which are general, which can be actually translated or interpreted relatively, were in providing some overall guidelines or guidance on what we call it the family law, and that has been serving and of course is still effective. Perhaps I might stop that context analysis there. Over.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Hassan. Zabib, are you ready to share? Kindly unmute yourself, Zabib. We do not hear you. We do not have Zabib ready right now, but maybe I will pose a similar question in the meantime to Asha. Asha, I know you are a Ugandan, you're Ugandan like me. So I know Uganda, like countries like Sudan and Ethiopia, have some similarities in some of their practices around family law. There's definitely a presence of discriminatory family and personal status laws and practices that hinder Muslim women from enjoying their rights and accessing justice. Can you please help us set some context for Uganda? What is the nature of laws and practices pertaining to Muslim marriages and divorce?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so thank you so much. For me, I think first of all, the starting point should be what is this family law that are we talking about, and why is it that this question poses, conflict? Why does it, pose so many questions in people's minds to the extent of thinking that some countries do not actually have family law? And for me, in my context, family law, basically, it is a legal practice that discusses or that involves anything that is to do with family, things to do with guardianship, marriage, divorce, custody, name it, violence or peace, as long as that particular issue is within a family. For the case of Uganda, like our audience could be already aware, or they may not be aware, Uganda is a country that was once colonized. So what does this set? It sets the pace that, you know, we are in a common law system, and therefore we are following a certain system that comes all the way from the British. So in this case, we have way too many laws that we are following from Britain. And of course, as you already are aware, we have our supreme law, which in this case is the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. And when you look at this, the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, it states that, you know, it is the supreme law of the land, and therefore any law that tries to conflict it or to fight it in any way or to contradict it, then that particular law is null and void. So what does it mean? It means that we have the other many laws that we are talking about, but in any way that those particular laws or the so many laws may try to contradict the Constitution, then the Constitution should always stand out. But again, after the Constitution saying that, we have the too many laws that I've talked about that go ahead and contradict our laws. When you go to our Constitution, I think in Article 31, it states the effect that anybody who clocks the age of 18 has the right, you know, to contract and found a marriage, or, you know, a family rather. Anybody who wants, as long as I have clocked 18, I can always go into marriage. But hey, we do not have only the Constitution, like I have said. As the Muslims, we, for example, have the Mohammedan Act. When you look into the Marriage of Mohammedan Act, which is apparently supposed to be the law for Muslims in regard to marriage, divorce, inheritance, the Mohammedan Act does not specify in any way the age limit for when somebody should get married. So, and of course, the practice, we have seen so many sheikhs here. We have seen many Ugandans who have married underage girls. Underage, in this case, I mean those who are under 18. That is in tandem with the Constitution. But again, when you even go to the Registration of Customary Marriages Act, the Customary Marriages Act, again, for it does not even look, it also goes ahead to contradict what the Constitution says. It does not talk about the age of 18. For it, it states that if the girl has not yet clocked 16 years, then that particular marriage is null and void. So the question is, this is a law. It is a codified law. It is a law that was assented to by the president some time back. So meaning that it should be followed. It is legal. But again, look at what the Constitution is saying. So somebody who doesn't know the law, and even if they know the law, of course, we are going to opt for the Constitution, which is supreme, but then doesn't it call for amendment of the Registration of Customary Marriages Act? We have okay, I'll talk about this later, but we have the Succession Act, and now the Amendment Act, which just came in, I think, 1 or 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, and they have all, you know, the discrimination that comes in. And again, if maybe I may push you back to the Marriage and Divorce of Mohammedans Act. For it, it states somewhere that if divorce has taken place, you know, the man has an upper hand in registering that divorce. Then the question should be, what happens for the woman? What happens to the woman? If you go to Article 129 of the Constitution, it says that, you know, administration of justice in Uganda shall be administered by the courts of judicature and the other subordinate courts like Kadhi courts. That is Article 129. We have been singing this. We have never had Kadhi courts. And the Constitution that we have today is a 1995 Constitution. We have had so many amendments within this Constitution, but we have never had anybody amending Article 129. Who would be the beneficiary of Article 129? Definitely the women, because it's the women who are sick, who are being divorced. It's the women who are victims of the unfairness in inheritance. It's the women who are victims in custody battles, guardianship, you know. So at the end of the day, if we do not have kadhi courts, of course, we have some informally operating courts here in Uganda. But again, if I give you just one example, for example, the kadhi court at Uganda Muslim Supreme Council, all the panelists are men. And we're talking about patriarchy. All the panelists are men. When I was interacting with some of them, you know, they bring in some religious illusions, claiming that, you know, Muslim women, you know, you're not supposed to be in leadership. But we had many women, Muslim women leaders. Aisha was a leader in Islam, she was. And you know, these are the Muslim female scholars and leaders that we know on record. So why should the Uganda Muslim Supreme Council continue to have a court that does not have any female? And even away from that, they have one courtroom where there's administration, it is the Directorate of Sharia. There's administration, it is the same court where hearing takes place. So if I come with my case, what does that mean? It means that I will be here reporting my case, narrating all my divorce, narrating what I have been going through, all the violence that I have been subjected to, while the other litigants who have also maybe come to report their issues, they are also listening in. And you know what actually happens behind these cameras in people's families, in people's homes. So at the end of the day, there is, but summing it up, we have way too many laws in Uganda. In this case, family laws. We have the Penal Code. We have the Mohammedan Act. I just mentioned the Supreme Law, which in this case is the Constitution. We have the Registration of Marriages Act. We have the Land Act. We have the succession. We have way too many laws. But the question is, to what extent are they protecting families? We have the Domestic Violence Act, which was passed in 2010. But to what extent are we having domestic violence in homes? Maybe for now, I'll stop at that, Rehma. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Asha, for that really wonderful submission. I was trying to follow the conversation, but also think about the themes that are coming out. Just a communication from our panelist, Zabib. She's having challenges joining us, but she shared a message that maybe I can share for now in regards to the context. One of the themes that she says are coming out strongly from what other panelists have shared is that one of them is around war and conflict that have continued to disrupt the community and family structure within South Sudan. And so also, the other thing she says is that, of course, the transitional constitution, it recognizes customary laws and practices, and these prevail over the ethnic communities and religious beliefs within South Sudan. And so the customary laws and courts perpetuate patriarchal traditions and often reinforce the subordinate status of women. And although she notes that although the national government has expressed its commitment to achieving gender equality, and this is, you know, is exhibited in some of the efforts that it's taken, the practice itself is not reflecting that. The general political and public attitude and indifference to gender issues, the low prioritization of these issues, as well as the institutional and organizational weakness of the justice system continues to be a challenge for women in South Sudan. So just highlighting that, the first point you mentioned about the war is very much connected to the Somali region around the point that Hassan mentioned on recovery from a prolonged conflict. And for particularly the Somali region might be what I could say, and this is something I'm happy to hear from Noura and Hassan about. But I know that the region has continued to struggle with religious militancy, and there is fear and polarization about the militant ideas that have been perpetrated by groups like Al-Shabaab. And also, of course, there's the elements around the traditional practices and the culture that is embedded in how family laws are practiced. And then, of course, Asha has really highlighted some of a point that is very much across a lot of the countries within the region, and that's around the issue of legal pluralism. And so I've probably had a question around this, but I'm glad that Asha brought it up. So we see that in the region, there's competing statutory and customary laws that exist alongside the religious laws, and these impact how women's rights and gender equality efforts play out really at the end of the day. And so that is really a wonderful reflection. But maybe just one follow-up question to and this is something, feel free as panelists, but also Noura, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. But I'm curious to hear how these different contexts have inspired the work you do. How do they make you feel, and why does it really matter to you, to the work you do? Feel free to come in to the discussion for any of you who is ready.
Just to give a quick answer, and I don't want to speak too much. I think Hassan might have more experience on this aspect. But one thing that that really informs our work is you have to be dynamic about the solutions that you can find. And that most of because of the informal law systems there are around, and the way most of Muslim family issues are dealt with at the community level, solutions come from the community side. So once you can gather the communities to really organize themselves in a way, especially women-led organizations within the communities, giving them the capacity to understand, one, what their rights are, realistically, what rights they can accomplish, and then having their support vocally, we've seen some really good responses from there. One thing that can be said about groups like the Al-Shabaab is that they change their tactics. They cycle it very quickly. They're very good at that. And that is something that we've had to learn to deal with. A lot of people say that you can only really you can only really access, legal facilities within the city. So for example, Mogadishu, other big cities like Beidabo, and that is true. But what we found is that if we have women-led organizations that are regular people, really, them going to these other communities in rural areas, for example, can really, and speaking to people on a people-to-people basis rather than some civil society person that's just coming in, we've seen some really good responses there. So that's really informed our work, that we continuously have to be dynamic in seeing what the issues are and then adapting ourselves as quickly as we can as well. And I think it's worked out, and we'll continue getting better, I hope.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that submission, Noura. Do we have any other reflections from Asha and Hassan before we move into the next segment?
Yeah, maybe let me say something. Of course, what we are talking about today, the challenges that are facing family law and maybe the family as an institution. It definitely feels good to be the one trusted to say some of the things that the wider public cannot say. If people are building trust in you, you'd definitely walk on the streets and be like, hey, I'm the one who is speaking out. Of course, this comes with the challenges, the stereotyping that I have already said about this, that, at the end of the day, we are stereotyped because you are the one talking. You've gone to present somewhere and, you are targeted because you are a Muslim woman who is saying what others cannot say. So at the end of the day, this is definitely inspiring. The challenges that we are grappling with. You're not going to hear all these injustices and you keep quiet. For example, did you know that for the case of Uganda, English is the official language of court? English is the official language of court. Yet the biggest percentage of people who are seeking justice in courts are not English speakers. They're not the literate. Those who are seeking access to justice in courts are people who are in rural areas, people who do not have access to education, people who cannot read and write, people who cannot even identify their own names. Simple things. If I can refer you to the Mohammedan Act, The Mohammedan Act gives the man 1 month to register divorce. If divorce has happened, he has 1 month to register divorce. What about me, the woman? What if I want it to be done so soon, you know, because by the time I'm seeking divorce, I need it. When you go to the Qadhi court that I mentioned earlier, when you go to the Uganda Muslim Supreme Council, there's a whole lot of bureaucracy. In fact, in that, when you go there to register a divorce, somewhere you're supposed to pay 100,000. 100,000 is not so much. I think that 100,000 is less than $20. But
Yeah, Asha, I'm sorry to cut you there, but I have a very similar question in the Q&A from Mulke, and she says, can Ugandans opt out of the Mohammedan Act? In other words, how does the legal pluralism work? I find it interesting, the colonial name of the act. So do you have a comment on that? Because you mentioned something about that act.
First of all, the Mohammedan Act that we are talking about is a 1906 law. None of us here was born in 1906. The entire population, we might not be having anybody who was born in 1906. So somebody is thinking of the issues that were happening then in 1906 to that. But again, remember in my introduction, I said that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, to the extent that anything that tries to contradict it is null and void. But again, when you read the Succession Act tells you that, you know, you can opt out, you can request to exempt yourself from the Succession Act. In this case, you, the Muslim. But again, you can, under what circumstances am I going to opt out of the Succession Act? Definitely, if I feel that the Succession Act is not answering what I want in the event that I'm trying to seek justice. Maybe I'm fighting an inheritance battle somewhere. I can always request to exempt myself out so that I follow Muslim laws. But I talked about Article 129 of the Constitution, which says that government shall establish Qadhi courts, which Qadhi courts are supposed to be looking at issues of Muslims in issues of divorce, you know, marriage, inheritance. But Qadhi courts are not there, and that should be addressing that. And the ones which are there are informal. They are informal and they handle issues the way they want. We do not have an enabling law that would be, in this case, that would have established Qadhi courts, which Qadhi courts would clearly provide for how inheritance, how marriage, how divorce should be handled in the Muslim. But what happens if a Muslim goes to a Qadhi court somewhere, which is informal, and they fail to access justice there? You know what happens? At the end of the day, many of them again now run back to formal courts to seek justice. But it is legal for them. But why should all this bureaucracy be there? I thought we should be having one legal system. And in the event that we have two, a plural one like we do have in Uganda, then it shouldn't be contradicting the other. What should happen if I am a girl, I have married under the Constitution, if I am above 18, but at the same time, some other girl will be is a Muslim and she's marrying when she is still under, because the Mohammedan Act does not provide for what age I should get married. What if I want to do a customary marriage and I am 16 years? Because the Registration of Customary Marriages Act says that if I'm 16 and consent is sought, then haven't you seen girls who have married when they are even 13? Look at the effects of COVID. What happened? We had so many girls being married off, even 13-year-olds. So at the end of the day, it is still a huge, huge problem. Hence, the reason why some of us are on this platform today to say what the wider public cannot say. And it keeps inspiring us to come out and, you know, speak about the injustices that our people are grappling with. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. It's inspiring to listen to you speak about your journey and what inspires you to do the work you do. I want to pivot a bit into the hope segment, because we've heard a lot about the challenges we have within the context we are operating. And Noura, I think you can come in here and take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahema. So recently in Somalia, we've been going through a very long election phase. We just finished our presidential elections recently. Similarly, in Somaliland, they had elections last year, council elections and other elections like that. So I'd like to pose a question to Hasan from Somaliland. Hasan, you're a legal researcher, and from your experience drafting legal documents, including family laws, we want to hear your thoughts on the opportunities that such moments, like election moments, present for family law and reform efforts. As you said, we're coming out of a very long conflict, and in many ways, Somaliland is much better off than Somalia. So are there any entry points for activists or people like you who draft laws? Is there any areas to push in for family law agendas? Hasan, I hope you can hear me. Hasan, you haven't unmuted yourself. Hello.
Yeah, okay. So good. Perhaps I might take one step back and then link up with these angry issues that we're talking about it. So then, in the first place, and as I have briefly mentioned it before, we have here a lack of arrangement of these competing legal sources, which actually remains the main source, the constant source of confusion and a scapegoat, not to standardize the family law, and of course, and consequently, not to address the injustices that affect each and everyone. And of course, I like to make one reservation there. That is, the problem is not actually having parallel or plural legal systems, but it is the failure to harmonize that, so that they, rather than complementing as they are now conflicting, and consequently undermining access to the right sometimes, and most importantly, access to the right itself. And I really like to stress that, because there are the two things: the right itself and the access to the right itself. So then there are some, and of course, under the three legal systems, there are common consensus on what constitutes right, for example, for with respect to the family issues. But the most contentious issues is about access to these mutually agreed rights. And I think that has something to do with the enforcement, with the procedures, with the availability of court rooms in all over the country, in the district. So then I think that is also one thing that I have to highlight. So then, and of course, the issue related to the statutory law in relation to the age of maturity is also, as Asha was telling, is still also true. For example, the statutory legislations have tendency to 18 years as the legal age of maturity. But although that family law of 1975 is actually, one way or the other, is silent to specifically mention, but coming to the customary practices and the Islamic interpretation is, and the dominant understanding is that it should be at least 18 and 15 years of age. And of course, that is one of the issues that some critical practitioners in the family law still has to do. And finally, the leaders actually don't like talking about the family law and raising it as a national issue, and actually due to its past stereotypes in the past, and the absence of course organized pressure and from the civil society and from the public at large. Of course, they shared that kind of experience. So then, and coming to the question that you actually raised, yes, there is an opportunity, and generally there is common consensus on the need for having unified family law. That is actually obvious need. There are many people who raise it, and although repeatedly I'm repeating that, there is no actually strong local pressure by the civil society or the public at large, and at least as a researcher, we didn't notice that. There is also a background work, including a draft family bill that has been imagined and has been discussed at certain circles in the decision-making centers, but not yet publicly brought into the public discourse. And of course, there is also strong freedom of expression in all over Somalia, including Somaliland, and of course the right to build. That's also a potential opportunity that can be capitalized by the activists movements. Of course, having new lawmakers in both Hargeisa and in May last year, and in Mogadishu now in April this year, is equally another opportunity to build on. But of course, the challenge is still there. The political willingness, will they proceed? And that bill, or of course, try to at least bring that into the public discourse, so that will they try to manage the politics around that? But also will the civil society and activists build their momentum to push the bill forward, and of course there is the rollback or the backfire that some of course civil society have been experiencing from both Hargeisa and Mogadishu with respect to sexual offenses related legislation that might have created some sort of, or might have sent some shocks back to them. But I think these are the opportunities that can be utilized or capitalized to again rebuild the momentum and of course organize the force. Over.
Hassan, thank you so much. You're very right, especially with the lawmakers and the parliamentarians. They're new, you know what I mean? You're very right. We do need a coordinated effort between civil societies, because civil societies were given part of the recent elections. We didn't have the one person, one vote, but civil societies were part of the people picking delegates to pick the parliamentarians. Although we didn't see how that process went completely, I think you're right, it's very important that civil societies play an active role. One other thing that you mentioned about the sexual offense bill and the shocks that it sent, it also, since this is the hope section, to be a little hopeful, what we've seen as civil societies now is that people are learning from how the bill was misconstrued or how it was interpreted. So we're learning from that, and inshallah, we're going to be coming back and seeing how we can continue pushing that bill. Asha, I would like to quickly move on to you and pose a question for you as well. Please remember, this is the hope section, so let's be hopeful about the things that we can do. In February, the Parliament of Uganda passed the Succession Amendment Bill this year, actually, yes, 2021. Can you tell us more about the opportunities at hand, especially for Muslim communities in the bill? Is there anything to be hopeful about, or have you even seen any changes, or any sort of effect that that's had since the bill amendment was made?
Okay, thank you. Of course, there's many opportunities. It is a nice amendment bill because of what it presents to us Muslims, but also to the general population and especially women. Like I said earlier, that yes, whereas we are Muslims and we have our law, one codified law, in this case, the Mohammedan it does not really answer everything that we so wish to have. So at the end of the day, whoever doesn't get justice in our informal Kadhi courts that are operating, they definitely run to the formal or to mainstream legal system while seeking justice. So there are quite a number of good things. And for example, the bill now makes it an offense for anyone who tries to evict a surviving spouse from the residential holding. In this case, the residential holding being the home, or what some other person would call maybe matrimonial home, where we have been living. If you have been living at home A and then your spouse passes on, you know the practice that has always been there, where we have seen so many people or spouses who have been evicted out of their homes upon the death of their spouse. So now the bill makes it illegal for anybody who does that, anybody who evicts the surviving spouse from the residential holding without, without the lawful means. And if that person does so, if that person goes ahead and unlawfully evicts that surviving spouse, then they are liable, if found guilty, to 7 years imprisonment. But also there are things like, there's the other opportunity of attestation of wills. We have had so many cases of people forging wills in their favor. And who is the victim here? Usually it is women, wives. Of course, we also have some cases where men have been victims. We have some rich women who have left a good estate, and who should be number one beneficiary of this estate? It should be their spouse. So if somebody has a husband, they have their children, definitely these are dependent relatives. They should be the number one beneficiaries. So we have had those cases where men have also been victims. So in now, the Succession Act now, the amendment is to the effect that any will must be attested to on each and every page. The person should write their names and address and sign on each and every page. Because what we have had in the past, we have had cases of people forging wills. And now the law says that in the event that we come across any page that is not signed or there's no address, then that will should therefore be put to validation, to verification. Then we have the other opportunity is seeking consent of the surviving spouse in the event that you want to dispose of any property from the estate. You have had so many cases, especially women. I want to be very objective. We have also men who have been, sent out of their wives, the late wives or the deceased's estate. But usually, because this is a patriarchal system that we are in, usually the women will always fall victim. So we have had so many who have been sent out of their deceased spouse's estate or property. So in this case, now the law is very clear that if you want to dispose of any property, regardless of whether you're the administrator or the executor of that estate, you have to first seek consent of the surviving spouse. Of the surviving spouse, you must seek their consent, the surviving spouse, the dependent relatives, and the lineal descendants. But again, the law here again is a little bit funny, because it goes ahead to say that if seeking that consent is not reasonable, to you, the administrator, if I think within your knowledge you feel it is not reasonable, that you can always go ahead and you ignore their consent. But what is the practice? People who always dispose of property of the deceased, they have their selfish interests. So I can always hide in that same section and say that, seeking their consent was not really reasonable. So I went ahead and disposed of property. Then the other thing I think we should be celebrating, the law says something about separation of spouses. That if at the time of death, at the time of the death of the intestate person, intestate means somebody who has died without a will. If at the time of his or her death, you had separated, then you, the surviving spouse, you do not have any interest in that spouse's property. But of course, we can't celebrate that. But the good or the opportunity in this section is that if at the time of death of the deceased, it is him, in this case, let's assume it is the man who has died. If it is him who had caused death, then you have interest in that property. If it is him who had caused that separation, maybe he sent you away from home, and of course you had no option. If it was a case of domestic violence, you ran away from home, and then you die while I am away, I am still entitled to that, to your estate. Then the other provision says that if at the time of death of that spouse during that separation, if the surviving spouse had gone for approved, imagine, you take note of these words, had gone for approved education program, you know, your spouse dies while you are away in an unapproved institution for education, you will not say that, you know, he has died at separation, therefore I'm not entitled. You are still entitled. But hey, I think here the law is limiting a little bit, because there are so many reasons as to why somebody really may be separated from their spouse. What if I'm just away on duty? I'm away, I'm working somewhere, and my husband dies, or my wife dies in due course. I went, maybe I'm in Liberia, I am working for a year and he dies. This is not an institution, this is not an education program. It is not an education program. It is not him who caused that separation. He's not the one who authorized my going away. Am I not entitled to the estate? But otherwise, we have so many, we have quite a lot, because now the law is a little bit clear on certain succession issues that we have grappled with in the past. At least it's something to really celebrate about. Of course, some of these issues had been already provided for in things like the Land Act, where still on things to do with, for example, family land, still the spouse had to seek consent of the other spouse. But at least here we have a law that is more clear on some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asha. I know across the continent, there's a lot of succession issues. So even to hear about bills that have some sort of amendment to even put into consideration is something for me to be hopeful about. In Somalia, we deal with a lot of land grabbing from female family members due to the fact of the conflict that happened, the people that moved, the constant moving within the country that people do. So we see a lot of cases in which women's husband will die and their assets will be taken away from them and they have no recourse, or very little recourse. Yes, but thank you so much for that contribution. So I'd just like to pose a question to everybody. Please, anybody, feel free to answer this. So we want to talk a little bit about how current movements have been impacted by Muslim women's movements before our time, especially movements that push for reform of discriminatory Muslim family laws. How are we still linked, and what lessons have we learned from these previous? Oh, sorry, everybody, before we get into this section, our other speaker, Zabib, is back. So Zabib, welcome back. Before we get into the section with this question, I'd just like to ask Zabib about a context in South Sudan. Traditional courts and elder tribunals in South Sudan have been and still are one of the main mechanisms used in family law and other personal statute matters. As a deeply patriarchal society governed by customary laws and practically supersedes the constitution, women are viewed and treated as not equal to the men's custom view as the head of the family. This breeds discrimination and injustice towards women in marriage and divorce issues. Yet customary courts handle up to 90% of the cases. So Zabib, would like to ask you, what immediate changes would you like to see in these courts to ensure justice for women at an individual and community level?
Thank you very much, Nora. And sorry that my network is not so good on this end. I'll go straight is one of the changes we want to see is have advocates, women advocates, working together to see the positivity of working together to consolidate efforts to stand against any discrimination, abuse that is directed to women. We also want to see women. We have several women judges, actually Muslims are more, but they are not given opportunities to handle cases, even in traditional courts. Let's say, let them be brought. If the family law is still taking its time, then let these judges be brought to at least handle cases of women in families. And we also talk about organizing meetings for Muslim religious leaders so that they will get some good education about the importance of having a family law for a country like South Sudan that is really suffering. And we also think that women economic empowerment is crucial. We see that strong women are women who have some little money and they can influence conversations on the tables. The other thing is to advocate for an establishment of a Qadi court, train some Muslim judges, more Muslim judges trained so that they can handle cases. And we also talk about educating the Muslim women on their rights given to them by the Creator himself. Yeah, and we are at this point, especially of educating women, is because we see that in South Sudan, people are not serious with practicing the religion and learning more about what Islam says. So it's important for people to first understand the religion and then understand their rights. Then they can advocate they can create the demand for the family law. Yes. You know?
Yes, we were listening. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You're right. We're very much right about teaching people about their rights in Islam. Although it's not a similar case in Somalia, we do see there's a lot of misinformation about the religion that is used to take rights away from vulnerable people, especially women in the communities. So yes, with that, I would like to go back to the question that we had earlier about previous movements by Muslim women and what we've learned from them. These kind of movements that have made reform to discriminatory Muslim family laws. So I'd like to welcome everybody to maybe answer this question. How do you think we're still linked to these movements, and what lessons have we learned from the people that came previously and that worked to get us the rights that we currently have? So yes, please feel free, put your hand up or just unmute and start talking.
Maybe I can go first if can I?
We love hearing from you, Asha. So yes, thank you.
Okay, so of course there's quite a lot that we can learn and that we have actually learned from the previous movements. Things like resistance, you have to, you should be aware of the audience. Of the audiences and the communities where we are providing or offering our services. We should also be aware of things like patriarchy that we are fighting every day. And and the patriarchy that we are talking about here is not only the men who are patriarchal. And for me, I've already said that it is easier to fight or to change the mindset of a man who is patriarchal than a woman who is patriarchal. You don't know what it means to wake up and go and stand somewhere and try to conduct sensitization and tell a group of women that, hey, you have a right to go to school, you have a right to pray, yes, you have a right to dress, you have a right to go and make your own money, you have a right to spend on yourself, you have a right to body autonomy. When the person you are actually telling knows within their head that they're supposed, this woman is patriarchal, changing their mindset is very, very, very hard. Of course, we are doing quite a lot of awareness, and at the end of the day, because of the movements that were there before us, we also know what they went through. We are aware that many of them were stereotyped Very many. I one time went to make a presentation and there was a representative from the Uganda Muslim Supreme Council. And while I left the podium, he had the audacity to tell me that look at this tough lawyer, you know, and you know, I had even to make him small statements that you're not informed about Islam. But I am informed about Islam. Islam does not only allow me to preach to men in the mosque, but it does. Islam has never said that I should not be aware about who I am. Islam has never told me that I shouldn't be informed. And if I am informed, I shouldn't spread this information. I shouldn't create awareness. So at the end of the day, yes, because of the pace that was already set by our sisters, you know, in the previous women movements, we know we have so many female leaders that we are following, you know, very many female leaders whose footsteps have really molded who we are today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asha. You're very right. I want to quickly answer a question that we got here in the chat from Hatun. She asks if she would like to hear about current Muslim movements such as Musawah and how it's reflecting on changing discourse on family law. I got to know about Musawah in a training just last year in September. Since then, it's really supercharged me to kind of find what I can do within the Somali context. And one thing that I realized from that training is that the way we talk about our religion and the rights that women have are not discussed very deeply within our communities, right? There's education on religious education in Somalia. It's very important. Yes, people are very aware of their religion, but they're not aware to the extent that misinformation is used, for example. So since then, me in particular, what I've been doing is, since I'm part of the civil society, is looking for funding with the training that Musawah has given me. Training specifically that talks about how do we discuss reform, Muslim family law reform, in a way that is clear, in a way that pushes our agenda, and in a way that really centers women. So far, it's been a bit of an uphill battle, but I'm really encouraged by the Somali women that I see around me who are actually doing the work. Very much these are, you know, mamas at a community level who go door to door helping their fellow women. How do we bring people like that into the discourse and say, you know, you can have conversations with sheikhs, you can welcome sheikhs into these conversations and, you know, have them understand your point of view and then push for these laws to be put into place. So that's how Musawah has affected me. Is there anybody else that would like to make a comment about Muslim women movements upon reform and what we've learned from them? I'll just give us a minute if anybody else would like to unmute. Yes, Sabib, I believe. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, question. And actually, the movements have told us a lot. For me,
Sabib, perhaps you can type.
my advocacy without, although I will talk to the Muslim women hours, but I will not bring it.
Zabib, we are having challenges hearing you, and we are pressed for time. So I'm going to suggest that you share in the chat what you're trying to share, because you keep breaking up. So I wanted us to move quickly into our action segment. I know we've had a lot of submissions around opportunities and lessons from previous movements, opportunities that are available. Speaking of opportunities, I wanted to share that we have the resources on Muslim family laws in these countries that we are featuring, the countries that I mentioned that we have shared about. These resources are really, they come in handy for activists who are and advocates who are working on the ground. So when you look at the resources, they outline the legislative frameworks, case laws available, policies, procedures in these countries and their impact on women. Another good area within that resource is the column on practice. So we know that sometimes policies are good on paper, that the legislative framework can be good, but the reality of women on the ground could be different. So the practice column covers a bit about what the differences are between what's on paper and what's on the streets. And so, from those experiences in these resources, activists can improve how they're approaching their advocacy work. So please go and check it out. One of the other segments in that country tables or that research is around access to justice, where the gaps are, where the opportunities are that we can take advantage of, and also, of course, what the positive developments are that we can learn from. So please check out those resources. So moving on swiftly to the action segment, I wanted our speakers in very few words, in like 2 minutes and below, to share some of their reflections on what we can do moving forward. How can we be part of the change we want to see to push for equality and justice in Muslim family laws? So I'll begin with you, Hassan. What are the top 3 challenges that need to be addressed pertaining to Muslim family laws in the Somali region, Somalia and Somaliland, and how would men, women, and children benefit from this reform if these issues were addressed?
And thank you, Rahima, once again. And so then, of course, we have covered it, and particularly as far as it concerns Somalia, including Somaliland, that the family and the SAT or the package, call it the Somali family law package, are generic and subject to unlimited interpretations, lacking clear rules of procedures, and of course, at the end of the day, ending up with enforcement complexities. With, in addition to that, sometimes, and specifically in certain areas, of course, majority of the people, and assuming that 50% of the Somali people living in the rural areas, while of course more than or about half of these people are still opting to non-statutory systems, then having only perhaps 20 to 25 cases resolved in the I mean, that scenario, what are the possible or potential actions that we can recommend? So that number one, I think for the policymakers, for the activists, for the researchers, of course, there is a need for having a dialogue, regardless of the complexities and sensitivity, of course, accommodating the past stereotypes, we can still let the wheel round. The dialogue can still continue with the objective of reaching consensus on the contested provisions or the principles that might come into the family law, such as the legal age of marriage, the clear rules of procedures, and of course making it simple so that it can not only serve for privileged, for elite, for educated, it can be also quick, so that quick relief could actually be given to any victim of such family cases, and so that the statutory legal systems, particularly the possible statutory family law could actually be attractive to all, and that means minimizing the prolonged delay, the unjustified delays, and the difficulties of the implementation. I mean, all these things to accommodate. So number one, dialogue towards political consensus. And to do that, they will actually need to redrafting the family law. That means not just to be handled by technocrats, but be led by facilitators to all the corners of the country, the society, be presented to all groups, including even, I mean, honestly speaking, it has to be shared and presented to any who have like religious grounds or political or like social or cultural points, so that their points could actually be accommodated, or some sort of understanding could actually be built, and with the objective of the vision, shall we actually reach a unified family law where we can relieve the pressure of that we are actually receiving in relation to the family issues and the disputes. And to this end, we will need to invest in managing the politics of the process by doing what? Making sure that religious groups, political parties, I mean, they are really, I mean, because of political cards, and always the opposition like to politicize, and the government actually like to sugarcoat. So that means, and even that agenda might be some sort of agreement could be built so that the politicization of this agenda could be reached. And media is actually important, and Nora actually knows how the SOB has been highly politicized, and then some even tried to recall what has happened in some 4 decades ago in 1972. So then, and perhaps these are the immediate action issues or action points that could be taken. Elders even could be brought, and of course all that can happen under the championship of the policymakers or the political leaders. Like, that is what my cat is telling me. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Hassan, for that. We have some submissions from Zabib in the chat. She says, for her segment, because I was going to ask her the same thing, because Zabib works for Islamic Development and Relief Agency. This is perhaps the only Islamic founded organization in the country that is working with Muslim women and within Muslim communities. And I wanted to ask her, because recently their Ministry of Gender, Child and Social Welfare established a steering committee to guide the development of a national family bill. So I wanted to find out from her what IDRA organization envisage or envisions to be like the process. What would they ideally want the process to look like, how it should be handled, and what their main asks are. And she's submitting that in the chat. She's talking about mobilizing and engaging grassroots women to demand for the change around family law reform, providing them with trainings and the knowledge, of course. I'm guessing this is knowledge around Islam and gender issues, and organizing dialogues. She seems to agree with Hassan, among others. I'll quickly turn to Asha in under 2 minutes, Asha. Your work with the Islamic Women's Initiative for Justice, Law and Peace has been really commendable in many Muslim communities within Uganda. What are the main demands we wanted to find out what the main demands of Muslim women in Uganda are, and what change you are seeking, what change are you seeking around family law reform within the work you do in this organization at the moment.
Thank you, Rehma. There are so many demands that Muslim women make, very, very, very many. And or especially in this case for purposes of this discussion in regard to accessing justice within the family law related issues. One, of course, I have earlier on highlighted quite a number of them which affect us as Muslim women. And I earlier on highlighted that the Succession Act, yes, whereas we are here happy about the amendment, but there are still issues within the laws generally, but also specifically to the Succession Act. The Succession Act, if I may maybe just have to re-echo this, does not in any way provide specific provisions on Muslim succession. And if you go in the Succession Act, yeah, in I think section 334, the act says that you as a Muslim, you can request to be exempted from the Succession Act. But why would I mean, I would want to request for this exemption when I have an option, when I have an alternative, but there is no alternative. I earlier told you that in Article 129, the Constitution says that, you know, Parliament will have to put up a law and establish Qadi courts. But the Qadi courts that should be answering me if I am running away from the Succession Act, they are nowhere to be seen. And if they are there, these are...
Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what you are seeking to see around reform and change as GHoA, your organization, if you've exhausted the rest of the issues you're working on.
Definitely, we want change in laws. The loopholes that I am highlighting in the laws that we have, definitely we need change. And as a Muslim community, we need the codification of specific Muslim laws that are going to provide for the Muslim related issues that we are talking about. Because we do not have the laws. We do not have the laws. And if Rehma, you can maybe share with the public, maybe share with them that link for the Uganda country table, they will see how far we have come. What, you know, what steps have been taken in coming up, for example, with the Qadi courts. We are badly pushing for establishment of Qadi courts under Article 129. We badly need them. We need the Qadi courts because once we have them, then definitely, which all the issues that we are trying to grapple with, they will be sorted. We have Muslims, we marry under the Mohammedan Act. So if I'm marrying under the Mohammedan Act, I would love to, you know, go and challenge the divorce challenges, you know, marriage, to go and, you know, be answered within the Muslim family laws, but we do not have them. As an institution, we are doing quite a lot, but we are also trying to empower the imams and the women. We want women ambassadors. I earlier told you that we have women who are patriarchal in nature. So at the end of the day, we want to have grassroots women going around to teach people that, hey, we have a right even when we are Muslim women. The imams, we want them, there are things that we don't hear in mosques. We want to see more imams saying that women should go to school. Women have a right to go and work. We want to hear these things in the mosque. We don't want to just only hear about preparing for the hereafter.
Okay. Thank you so much, Asha. Thank you so much. Your passion is infectious. So I keep nodding to all your submissions. So just quickly, Noura, do you have any reflections from the conversations you've had and the actions, the calls to action from our guests we've had today? Quickly, in a minute or two.
Yes, I've had a few reflections. Particularly, I think it's really important to see post-conflict states like us in South Sudan and Somaliland and where we're starting from, and currently what we can learn from places like Uganda. So it's been very interesting listening to the number of amendments and number of changes in the laws and the confusing sort of conflicts within the laws that we hear from Asha's context. And there's a lot that we can learn from there right now. As Hassan said, we need clear laws And I think we have an opportunity there in Somaliland, and South Sudan, where we're at a state right now where we can create clear laws, or at least advocate for clear laws, Muslim family laws, to help us. So it's been very interesting seeing this from the other aspect. And it's very, very interesting listening to Asha as well, seeing the kind of work that Hassan and Zabib have been doing. So thank you all very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nora, for those reflections. So we are coming to the end. We are at the end of our event. Thank you all so much for joining us. Just a quick recap on how you can be part of the Campaign for Justice series, or our Campaign for Justice in Muslim family laws globally. You can be a national supporter. You can join us just as a supporter who can amplify the work of advocates who are working at the national level. You can explore our website for resources like our advocacy toolkit. You can amplify our messages on social media, and definitely, of course, follow us for updates on our social media platforms. So on Twitter and YouTube, you can look for @Musawah, and on Facebook and IG, you can look for @Musawah Movement. We had a lot of questions in the chat, but hopefully some of those have been answered. Those that haven't, we will follow up via email. Thank you all for your submissions and for joining us today. I would like to thank the Musawah team at the back end who have been tirelessly working behind the scenes to make this happen. A video recording of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel. I understand we had some Facebook challenges, and so we will try to get that sorted and share the links with you all. Thank you again for your to our, of course, extraordinary panel for joining us, and good luck with all the amazing work that you do on the ground in pushing or working towards more equality and justice in our world today. We will be seeing you again soon for more episodes of the Standing for Justice series and for other exciting conversations as part of Musawah's work and the Campaign for Justice. Thank you, and have a good day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye for now, each and everyone.
Thank you.